norms of corporate and national culture are so well established. And any non-European doing business on the continent more than a decade ago was similarly impressed with the substantial difficulty the range of European languages and cultures presented for effective operations and intra-firm information transfer. Some viewers will recognize these three essential characteristics of a global corporation: receptiveness, flexibility, and cultural identity, as the essential characteristics of any corporation dedicated to the principles of total quality management with its spirit of Kaizen or continuous improvement. Indeed, now that the world economy is so interconnected, the secret of being a successful global corporation is the secret of being a successful corporation, period. Competitive benchmarking, the willingness to seek out and adopt best-of-breed technologies and management practices, the hallmarks of effective companies in any size market will be the hallmarks of the best global corporations. All that is different is that the external stimuli and the internal operations of the corporation contain a richer mix of cultural and national influences. What will be the essential character of a typical executive in such a global corporation? I once asked Jeswald Salacuse, the former dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and the author of Making Global Deals, the following question. In a world with nearly 200 companies, no firm, no matter how global, can hope to have a negotiator who is expert in the cultural norms and business practices of each nation. In view of this constraint, what kind of person would you recommend to head up a team making global deals? Salacuse responded that the ideal would be someone who is bicultural, or at a minimum has lived for some time in another culture. If such a person is not available, a member of a minority group in one's own culture, in America, a black or a woman, would be a good substitute. The reason? Only people like this will have been forced by their life experiences to be open to the ways and norms that govern another more dominant group or culture's behavior. In other words, we're talking again about people who are receptive, flexible, and yet have, from their own culture, some sense of cultural identity. Finally, being an effective multicultural entrepreneur is above all about leadership, not just in a corporate, but also in a political sense. The structure and character of corporations mean that they are the first institutions on the planet to experience the full impact of being global in a way that individual citizens and certainly national governments cannot. Multinational corporations will see, for example, the cross-border consequences of environmental degradation and of political repression. With this experience comes an obligation, and it's an obligation not just to their shareholders. Leaders of global corporations can exert a powerful influence on government leaders to act in cooperative ways which address global issues such as the environment, immigration, and even nuclear proliferation. We live in a time where America, though still the lone military superpower, is certainly no longer the only economic superpower. In this situation, enlightened leadership by the CEOs of global corporations can help fill the power vacuum in a constructive fashion. By virtue of their development of the competitive necessities of receptivity, flexibility, and cultural identity, truly global corporations of the 21st century will be positioned to make a unique and unprecedented contribution to peace and sustainable global economic and political development.
Thank you, Dr. McClain. Let's begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. The first question is coming from Medellin, Colombia. It's coming via fax from FENALCO. The video clips in Dr. McClain's presentation describe the experiences of the smaller firms serving as their suppliers and distributors. But the smaller firms were in their own countries. How can small firms operating in a foreign environment become multicultural? Often they don't have the staff with language skills or experience abroad.
Well, Armando, it's a long process to become multicultural for smaller firms. There's no question that it takes time. But in every firm's environment, in the local environment, there are always firms that have international experience. And you can learn from those firms and how they're relating to their multinational partners. I think the key thing is the three principles I enunciated in my presentation. Be receptive to outside influences and be able to filter them. Be flexible and adaptable in your own business culture. And at the same time, reflect all of those experiences against your own experience and your own cultural background. I think if you do that, you can in fact gradually over a period of time truly become a multicultural organization. But as Mr. Kelly said in the Coca-Cola presentation, you need to be patient. It does take time, but you need to be open. I think that's really the key.
Yes, I think open-mindedness is very important. In any part of the world, you can have a small firm, but you can always try to catch local resources as well as regional resources. And there are always people in your area that might serve as a consultant who might be multicultural or bilingual to help you understand the mores and ways of doing business in other parts of the world, and we can learn from them.
Now we're going back to the state of Mexico, and this is a live phone call coming in from the university in Cuautitlán, National Autonomous University. Dr. David, from your point of view, what would be your recommendation for a Mexican entrepreneur who invests in the United States?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that a Mexican entrepreneur who invests in the United States should get to know the partners on the other side well. Relationships are the key to successful business. The second thing, of course, would be that one would have to have some technology to bring to the party or some special product niche to serve, and that would have to be something that would be attractive to American consumers. The United States is a country that is characterized typically by the rule of law. And so there is a good system, of course, of contracts and legal recourse should disputes arise. And in fact, in the United States, more recently, there's a great tradition of non-legal resolution of disputes, arbitration and mediation and that sort of thing. So that wouldn't be a major concern. But again, I think the major considerations are getting to know one's partner and being able to bring something to the party that the customer wants. An investment just for the sake of making an investment, if no one will buy the resulting product, is not going to be successful.
Yes, I think the important piece about making any investment in the United States is to know about the ways the United States works. And secondly, there must be some local, regional, and national needs in the United States. And if you can meet the needs, then your products will be a successful product. The other piece is do acquire enough knowledge and information about the laws, regulations, so that you can be more able to communicate on those terms.
The other thing I might add, if I might, is that doing business in the United States means doing business in a very informal culture. Sometimes things from a more formal Mexican culture would appear to be very chaotic in the United States. And I think anyone making an investment has to be comfortable with the fact that younger people have more prominence in business in the United States. Decentralization is more a part of the culture. One Mexican entrepreneur would probably have to be comfortable with a little less control over their investment in the United States than they would in Mexico. But of course that just reflects being flexible and adaptable to a different cultural environment.
Thank you. And now, greetings to our participants from Lima, Peru. Good morning. A special greeting to all of you from our university here. Dr. McClain has explained very clearly everything about the features of a multi-sectoral organization as receptivity, flexibility, and cultural identity. Is it possible, perhaps, to define these characteristics, or the characteristics that the leader has to have, the new entrepreneur, multicultural entrepreneur? What would be the characteristics of such a leader?
Well, thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question and really quite apt. And at the concluding part of my presentation, I mentioned that a multicultural entrepreneur has special responsibilities for leadership, and so it's natural to say, what would that leader look like? I think the first thing is vision. A leader has to have a sense of where he's going in this new multicultural environment. A second consideration, I think, has to be a strong sense of ethics, a strong sense of how to behave in a new cultural environment, but also what the leader believes. I think the third thing is the leader has to be able to communicate to all the people in his organization these values. We increasingly speak in much of our management training of what we call a leader-full organization. In other words, an organization that doesn't just have one leader, but an organization that is full of people who are capable of leading at different points in time. So there's a sense of, I suppose the popular word would be empowerment of the entire organization, so that all people in the organization can in fact be effective leaders. That's what I would say is the essential characteristics of a leader in a multicultural environment.
A leader, I think, needs to have a global vision, that the globe is his neighborhood, no matter how far that village is in the world. A leader must be cross-culturally competent in being able to understand what is going on in other parts of the world. A leader must have social cultural responsibilities and be willing to mentor. And most of all, a leader is full of empathy. Empathy in understanding the needs of the world.
And now we're from Peru, we're going back to Mexico, and this question is coming from Ciudad Victoria, Autonomous University, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Hello? First, we're going to then have the question coming from Medellín, Colombia. Hello?
Medellín. Bueno, Medellín. Parece que tenemos algún problema con la comunicación.
There is some problem with communication. The phone lines are not coming in. Now we're going to take a question coming from the Distance University from San Jose, Costa Rica. And this is the question via fax. The tensions between global and local forces described by Dr. McClain seem particularly sharp in a number of countries in Latin America. Do you ever see economies which have opened themselves to international influences, going back to the policies of import substitution and self-sufficiency which were in place in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, it would be easy for me to say no, never. I don't anticipate this. But honestly, I think we have to be careful in saying that. All of these reforms have some degree of fragility, even though they've raised living standards substantially for great fractions of the population. In the United States recently, Lester Thurow has written a book on the future of capitalism in which he expresses his concern about its instability. Jeffrey Garten, the dean of the Yale School of Management, has an article in the most recent Harvard Business Review saying essentially the same thing. And even more recently, George Soros, who has made so much money from very unregulated financial markets, has expressed his concern that the market ideology is becoming too dominant in the world. All of these authors speak to the need to take into account the fact that any time there's economic change, there are winners and losers. Typically, a market-based society creates more winners than losers, but the losers need to be considered and needed to be taken care of as best as can be done. I think the fundamental way to do that is to improve the skills of all the population so that they can cope with the change that a market-oriented environment entails. But it's certainly the case that unless we're aware of the side effects of moving toward free markets, unless we're aware of those side effects, it could be the case that there'll be some retrenchment. And that, I think, would be unfortunate for the region as a whole.
Yeah. I think the responsibilities of world leaders and entrepreneurs is to be sure that all over the world people are educated, they have a competitive edge in what they do, and they have the professional know-how and the technical know-how so that they are not left out of the picture. I think that is empowerment through education and literacy.
Vamos ahora a México, Distrito Federal. La participación
And now
proviene de la
we're going
Universidad
back to the
Nacional
Federal
Autónoma de
District of
Facultad
Mexico.
de Medicina Veterinaria y Zootecnia. Le escuchamos.
Okay,
Sí,
adelante.
adelante, México.
Hello?
Sí, buenos días.
Good morning.
México.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Bueno, parece que hoy tenemos algunos
We
problemas,
have
así como de carácter
we
técnico.
have several
Ofrecemos
technical
nuestras
problems with
disculpas,
the
pero
phone
de
lines. I'm
todas
sorry.
maneras tenemos algunas
We apologize,
preguntas
but we do have a
vía
few
fax
other
que nos han
questions
enviado.
that via
Sí, lo
fax.
escuchamos.
Okay, there we are. Hello?
Bueno,
Hello?
aló, México.
Bueno,
Sí, México. Bueno, vamos a formular una de las que nos llegó.
We're
vía
going to
fax.
go ahead with another question via fax. This one came from Rainbird, Tijuana, Baja California, our neighbors from Tijuana.
Es muy bueno ser multicultural.
It's all very well to be multicultural.
¿No cree que
But
en
what
una
do you
asociación
do if you're in a
internacional
joint
usted y su
venture
socio deben
and your
esforzarse
partner
de igual
isn't
medida?
making much of an effort to
Un
meet
socio
you
sin
halfway?
sensibilidad de las normas de cultura
A
locales
partner
puede
insensitive
ser
to local
negativo,
cultural norms
aún
can be a
habiendo
real
cooperado
handicap,
con
even if the
tecnología
partner
esencial
brings
para el negocio.
essential technology to the venture.
Well, that's really true. And in this circumstance, the best analogy I have is an analogy as with marriage. If the marriage is not working, then both partners have to try hard to make it work. And if one partner is not willing to try, then it's not likely, perhaps, that the marriage can be sustained. However, a company that brings a lot of technology to a market, but at the same time is culturally insensitive, is not going to succeed. We saw in the Coca-Cola videotape that Pepsi-Cola had not been as sensitive to the Japanese market as Coke had been. And as a result, Pepsi was only a minor competitor. So if you're in a joint venture with a partner who is being insensitive to the local culture, rest assured that that partner will not succeed in your environment. They will have to become sensitive. And in some sense, it's your responsibility as the partner of this insensitive foreign partner, it's your responsibility to convince them that they really do have to change in order to configure with the local norms. Otherwise, they won't be successful, and you won't either. At some point, you may have to walk away from the deal and seek a new partner.
Yes, I think any success partnership means the need to invest in human communication, in human relations. If one partner is not willing to be sensitive and to be able to communicate in a positive way, then the partnership may eventually dissolve. I think it's very important that we look at human transactions as embedded in cultures. So if we don't have the cultural sensitivity, eventually that human relations will not be there. And I really believe that that is where the investment must be. Invest in human understanding and human relations.
Vamos a tratar de restablecer nuestras comunicaciones
Let's try
telefónicas.
to
Si
restore our
tenemos suerte,
phone
vamos a escuchar una
communications.
pregunta que
Let's
nos
see
saquen desde
if
Puerto Vallarta,
this one comes
Jalisco,
through from
en la
Jalisco,
Universidad de
Guadalajara,
Centro
Mexico.
Universitario de la Costa. Adelante, Guadalajara. Puerto
Buenos
Vallarta.
días. Buenos días, les hablo desde Puerto Vallarta.
Okay, I am calling from Puerto Vallarta, and this is my question. What do you recommend us for certain service companies for them to standardize according to our own different clients and different cultures of the different cultures of our clients? We are in the hotel business. It's very easy to standardize things in the industry of manufacturing and all that, but what do you recommend for the service industry, like a hotel and all these cultures that are so varied?
Well, I can, I think, speak very well to that question, because at the University of Hawaii we have a travel industry management school that is known throughout Asia and indeed the world. And what we tell our students in our travel industry management school is, in fact, to customize in the service sector rather than to homogenize. This is a perfect example of a true multicultural entrepreneur not forgetting his own culture and recognizing the cultures that one serves. I suppose if we were to go into the hotel industry in a bit more depth, there are certain areas where centralization makes sense. Accounting, finance, centralization of foreign exchange operations, all of that is fairly acultural. It doesn't have any particular cultural considerations. But where it comes to getting closer and closer to the customer, in that circumstance, it's really essential to customize to the customer's needs and wants. I wouldn't resist that at all. I wouldn't try to give, we might call it a vanilla experience to all our customers. That wouldn't be appropriate. They're looking for many flavors.
Yes, in order to be a world-class hotel or restaurant or resort, I think we cater to the world population. A deep understanding of each culture's specific characteristics will help to serve your customers better. A customer from Japan may need certain things, such as a very good bath. A customer from China may want a hot tea with ginseng. A customer from Europe may want something else, continental breakfast perhaps. These are the things that we must learn and study. And we learn from those experiences in order to cater to this global population.
Vamos a México, Distrito Federal. La pregunta la formulan desde la Universidad.
And now we're going to Mexico again. This is coming from the veterinary medicine faculty. Good morning. Our question is the following. How important do you consider recreation, work recreation, and what importance do you think has a democratic environment in forming, in training multicultural human resources? Thank you.
Those are excellent questions. With regard to the role of recreation, one of the things that I have learned from working a fair amount in Japan is the extreme importance of activity together away from the work site. This is a wonderful device to bond people together. It also contributes to the point you mentioned in your second question about democratization in the workplace. If one goes away to the soccer field or the baseball field or whatever and has some sort of group activity, then all of a sudden people's hierarchical roles no longer matter. Other things matter, skill and that sort of thing, and athletic skill. And so in that circumstance, it's really possible for people to bond together in new ways, and then when they come back into the workplace, they're a much more effective team. I think that certainly is something the Japanese have taught us, and it's I think, generally applicable.
Yeah. If one works for a company and feels a member of that family, then there must be some kinship developed. It's difficult to develop a kinship system if the work situation is very formal and perhaps sometimes unidirectional. But in a recreation setting where it's a picnic or a game by the beach or some activities that require some entertainment, then suddenly that sudden intimacy is established. With that intimacy, you can become a family, and you feel that there is a sense of allegiance to this family. And this way, I think we work a lot better.
With regard to your second question concerning democratization in the workplace, how important this is depends on the kind of product you have, the kind of industry you're in, and how many competitors you have, how responsive you have to be. Democratization is not a be-all and end-all. It may be appropriate for a political process, but it's not necessarily the best way to run a company. But if you do want to have what I mentioned before as a leader-full organization, there is a sense of empowering people. It may not be a perfectly democratic company. It may be that somebody needs to be in charge and make the hard decisions. But everyone needs to feel that they have some power to influence the course of the company. Dr. Cheng's remarks about family, I think, are quite appropriate here. Everybody needs to feel a part of the group.
And now we're going back to Medellin. Your call?
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Nuestra pregunta es
Our
la siguiente.
question is the following.
El conocimiento multicultural
Multicultural
podría ser
knowledge,
asimilado como
could
el
it be
conocimiento horizontal,
assimilated to the lateral or horizontal knowledge because it doesn't go in depth in specific matters? Does it have anything to do with international competitiveness regarding the vertical knowledge, which is what we call our specializations?
In many industries, that vertical knowledge is absolutely essential to being competitive. And in many high-tech industries, I know, for example, in the United States now, companies are spending a fair amount of money to have their engineers be able to understand and read the technical reports that are being produced in other countries, particularly in Japan. That requires language skills, that requires experience abroad and understanding the environments in which Japanese engineers operate. So even in that vertical area, with the technical specialized knowledge, there's a role for multiculturalism. In fact, because the other side, the other countries may be inventing things faster than we do, it's absolutely essential to keep your hand on the pulse of that technological development. So it's not just in the horizontal sort of the easy bowing and what kind of foods to eat and that sort of thing. That's part of it. But multiculturalism also has a role in the vertical area, the technical knowledge. Good point.
Yeah, the Qualcomm success story in San Diego is one that I can bring to this question. The Qualcomm idea of development is, as you are developing what you are going to show the market now, you're also already developing your product 9 months from now that will be showing to the market. So you keep moving and you keep moving ahead with knowledge information that you can absorb from all over the world. So you not only have to understand what you are doing in terms of the products that you are selling and the products you will be selling, but you also know what products will be selling in Tokyo and what products will be selling in Malaysia. As a result, you must understand what their technical exchanges are. And for that reason, linguistic skills, cross-cultural skills, and multicultural understanding must be part of the horizontal and the vertical challenges.
Welcome the question from Caracas, Venezuela, University in Venezuela. Thank you for the opportunity you're giving us to ask our question. Our question is the following. What are the strategies, the most adequate ones, to establish the optimal point between the following features: receptivity, flexibility, and national or cultural identity?
Well, I think this is really a process of trial and error. Without experience, you can't have a feeling for whether you're collecting too much information or too little. Without experience, you can't have a sense of whether you've been too flexible or too inflexible. You can't have a sense of how much to project your national culture. But I can say this, it's really the case that you have to strike an effective balance across all of these, and it's only really a matter of trial and error. There is no formula, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And if you have the willingness and courage to try it out and create the most optimum experience for learning and for business transactions, you will be successful.
And this question is coming from Tamaulipas, Ciudad Victoria, Mexico. What is the risk that we have of losing the identity of the product or the firm, the enterprise, with all of this flexibility? And what would be the first problem that a Japanese firm would have when they establish this new system of just-in-time?
Well, I think I hear two questions there. First of all, with regard to the risk of losing one's identity. If one is going abroad and has a product that has worked in the local market, there is certainly the risk that one's identity will change. You'll find yourself doing things that you hadn't planned on doing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're being responsive to the customer, you'll be successful. With regard to the question about the problems that Japanese firms had with implementing just-in-time, well, that was so long ago that all of them began to do it in the 1950s and 1960s. I'm sure they did have some problems. It's a problem of where do you keep the inventories, and how do you handle that when you're shrinking them down in the plant? But some people say all the inventories in Japan are out there on the highways driving around in the trucks. I'm not sure that's the case, but it's the case that any company adopting just-in-time has to be incredibly precise about its processes. I'm sure the Japanese had to do that in the 50s and 60s. Western companies are having to do that in the 80s and 90s. You have to be very clear about how exactly you get your work done. And most of us have not thought about that in very precise detail.
In that sense, I think we do learn from the Japanese stories. We've learned it from Sony, we've learned from Sanyong and many other companies. But I think, most importantly, there should not be a fear for losing one's own identity. Rather, adding onto one's identity multiple perspectives. This way, you are not going to lose your identity because the essence is still there. But the multiple perspectives would make your product and your work habits a lot better and user-friendly.
Saludamos a Guanajuato. La pregunta la formula el
We're
Instituto
welcoming
Tecnológico
Guanajuato's
de
question
Celaya,
from the Institute of
Guanajuato, México.
Celaya.
Bien, la pregunta es,
The
¿cómo
question is,
lograr
how can
la
we
amplitud del sentido
achieve
político
the amplitude
internacional?
of the political sense in the international political sense?
Could I ask the questioner to repeat the
Can
question?
you repeat? ¿Puede repetir la pregunta?
¿Sí? ¿Cómo lograr
How
la
can we
amplitud
achieve
del sentido político internacional?